Welcome to the Cursed Hour, where true horror never sleeps. If this story chills your spine or makes you question the darkness around you, hit that like button, share the fear, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now and step into the hour where curses come alive. Story number 1, The Room That Beckoned. The city sparkled, but the room chilled. On a business trip to Los Angeles, I checked into a motel in Anaheim, a lively area near Disneyland with bright stores and bustling restaurants. I was staying about an hour's drive from the airport in a place called Anaheim, not too far from Disneyland. There were 3-hour convenience stores and good-looking restaurants right by my motel. The clerk greeted me warmly, but the moment I touched the key card to my room sensor, a cold dread washed over me. The second I checked into my room, literally the second I touched the key card to the sensor on the door, something didn't sit right with me. The room was clean, a standard single bed, yet an unease I couldn't name clung to it. The hotel room was fine, nice. In fact, for a business trip, it was just a normal single bed. There was nothing wrong with it, just I didn't like it. The air felt wrong, and the walls seemed to watch. The door invited, and my spine froze. Brushing off the feeling as work nerves, I grabbed dinner nearby and returned to review presentation notes. I went downstairs to grab some dinner in a nearby restaurant. After that, I headed back to my room to go over my notes for the presentation. A sudden noise broke my focus. The bathroom door eased open, as if someone were beckoning me inside. I heard a noise, a creak. I watched as the bathroom door slowly opened by itself. It felt as if someone were opening it, as if for me to enter, inviting me in. My body locked, fear socketing through me. My spine froze. It scared me. I'd never experienced anything like this before. Seeking logic, I checked for a breeze, finding the bedroom window ajar and closing it. The room wasn't empty. It was calling me. The door danced, and reason fled. The bathroom window was sealed, no draft to blame. Yet minutes later, the door opened again, accompanied by a faint rattle. I heard a rattling sound, and then the bathroom door creaked open again. I shut it, but it swung open a third time, and I left it, hoping to ignore it. When it happened the third time, I gave up on closing it. Then it moved, slowly at first, then slamming shut, only to open and slam again. The open door started swinging slowly, and then it slammed shut. It opened again and slammed shut. Panic surged. I called the front desk, but the clerk curtly claimed no rooms were available. I asked to switch rooms, but I was refused quite impolitely. I was told the hotel was fully booked. The door wasn't broken. It was alive. The legs tripped, and dread gripped. Resumed. I returned to my notes, but crossing the room, my legs buckled, as if something grabbed them, nearly pitching me into my suitcase. I started back to the desk when my legs felt trapped. I had no balance. I nearly flew head first into my suitcase. It felt as if someone had a hold of my legs, and if they tried to trip me, the gap under the bed loomed, dark and threatening. I didn't like the huge gap under it. Shaken, I called a friend, who suggested keeping a Bible close. I called a friend back home and told them what was going on. Do you have a Bible in your room? If you do, make friends with it tonight and keep it by your side. I found one in the drawer, but its pages held a horror. Bloodstains, red-brown, splattered on the edges. The room wasn't safe. It was stained with secrets. The blood marked, and I fled. The Bible's bloodied edges confirmed my terror. I couldn't stay. I flicked through the pages and noticed something strange in flashes. I saw a dark, brownish, reddish stain. I closed the Bible and saw blood on the edges. Grabbing my belongings, I fled, uncaring of my boss's opinion, and found another hotel. I didn't know what happened in that room. I just knew I didn't want to be there any longer. I walked around until I found another hotel. The Anaheim streets felt safer than that room's oppressive air. Something was just very wrong there, and I'm thankful that I got away from it. The room's call still echoes, and I'll never answer. The blood, the door, the unseen grip, they haunt every hotel stay, a reminder of what I escaped. Story number 2, Whispers of the Smoldering Heirloom. The family home stood like a proud sentinel, its worn walls hiding truths no resident should uncover, its windows glinting under the night's pale glow, casting shadows that danced with a life of their own. I stepped inside, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Wood, spice, something older, something that clung to the air, something that knew my name. The living room stretched, its floors warping, as if the house itself was bending time, its edges alive with a pulse I couldn't name. I was no stranger to heritage, but this was different. This was alive. This was a truth that pulsed in the dark. The mantel creaked, its wood groaning as I moved, its sound a rhythm that stirred in the silence, a rhythm that wasn't mine. The mirror by the fireplace glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on the frame, but the faces were gone, the mirror empty, the silence heavier. The house wasn't empty. It was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. I gazed deeper, the room stretching ahead, its walls bending as if the home was watching, waiting. The candlelight flickered, its beams warping into patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air grew denser, thick, with a weight that pressed against my mind, a weight that followed me. The house wasn't mine. It belonged to something else, something that stirred in the shadows. The night deepened, the house's pulse a drumbeat under my steps, its silence a predator. I carried my curiosity, a frail shield against the unknown, but the corners disagreed, their presence alive with mystery. I was a witness, a child, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The air murmured, the home a canvas of lives spent and lost, its walls holding echoes of those who'd lived here. I was no stranger to pride, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The house was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that held me. I come from an Indonesian family. One cried proud of its roots, and one always keen to latch onto something closely related to Indonesian history. When I was much younger, my mother had bought a wahang doll, used to be used for puppet theaters in Indonesia, and are said to have their own personality and vices. The doll quickly becomes the pride and joy in our house, a centerpiece on the mantel, smiling and looking over the room at all times. It had stood there for a year with never any bother. That was until my mom started seeing her now. Husband, the house's pulse was a spark, its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the mantel. The house's shadows deepened as we settled. The mantel's pulse a drumbeat under our gaze, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my wonder, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Woods? Something older, something that clung to the walls, something that knew my fears. The windows glinted, their glass etched with faint lines, almost symbols that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the room. The home wasn't just a shelter, it was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the centerpiece stretching, its edges warping as if the house was blinking, watching, waiting. The mirror by the sofa glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me but fragments of others. Faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on the frame, but the faces were gone, the mirror empty, the silence heavier. The house wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The room loomed ahead, its corners shadowed, but the air was wrong, heavy with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I saw flashes, voices in halls, footsteps on stairs, faces I didn't know but felt I should. Their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The candlelight danced, its glow bending as if the house was warping. I stepped back, the mantle a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the home was watching, waiting. The night was a weight, its walls a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd lived. I was a witness, a chaunt marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the glass, but the house disagreed. Its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to joy, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The home was a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark. The doll quickly got an eerie feeling to it, but nothing too unusual. When things got serious between my mother and stepdad, and he moved in, things started to get a bit freaky. It started off with picture frames falling off the walls and mantelpiece. Initially, not thinking much of it, just kept putting everything back in its place. Slowly, I kid you not, the face of the doll turns its grin into a frown. The house's pulse was a weight, its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the night. The mirror glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just us, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine, eyes that pulsed in the dark. The house's shadows followed us as we slept, the room's pulse a drumbeat under our feet, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my unease. The air heavy with a scent I couldn't place, wood, spice, something older, something that clung to the walls, something that knew my fears. The windows glinted, their glass etched with faint lines, almost symbols that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the floor. The home wasn't just a shelter, It was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the mantel stretching, its edges warping as if the house was blinking, watching, waiting. The mirror by the bed glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my blanket. But the faces were gone, the mirror empty, the silence heavier. The house wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The night loomed ahead, its corners shadowed, but the air was wrong, heavy with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I saw flashes, voices in halls, footsteps on stairs, faces I didn't know but felt I should, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the house was warping. I stepped back, the room a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the home was watching, waiting. The night was a wait, its walls a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd lived. I was a witness, a child marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the curtains, but the house disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to family, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The home was a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark, turned unpleasant to look at, but still all seemed innocent. One night, we had all gone to bed. Normally, we had candles on the mantelpiece, blew them out, and went upstairs. An hour or so later, smoke started to creep upstairs. The house's pulse was a weight, its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the stairs. The house wasn't empty. It was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a presence that knew our past, our fears, our sleep. My mother let out a yelp calling us down. The doll was on fire, having its arms stretched out in flames. No candle lit, a completely dark room aside for the doll. It cast the scariest shadow on the wall before my mom threw a bucket of water over it. Through all of this, to this day, it still sends a shiver running down my spine. The house was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that held us in its grip, a truth that changed us, a truth we couldn't escape. The house's shadows lingered as we reacted. The room's pulse a drumbeat under our feet, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my shock, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place, wood, spice, something older, something that clung to the walls, something that knew my fears. The windows glinted, their glass etched with faint lines, almost symbols that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the floor. The home wasn't just a shelter, it was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the mantel stretching, its edges warping as if the house was blinking, watching, waiting. The mirror by the door glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, My heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on the bucket. But the faces were gone, the mirror empty, the silence heavier. The house wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The night loomed ahead, its walls shadowed, but the air was wrong, heavy with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory, not my own. I saw flashes, voices in halls, footsteps on stairs, faces I didn't know but felt I should. Their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the house was warping. I stepped back, the room a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the home was watching, waiting. The night was a weight, its walls a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd lived. I was a witness, a child, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the glass, but the house disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to family, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The home was a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark. The house's shadows followed us as we recovered. The yard's pulse a drumbeat under our feet, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my relief, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Wood, spice, something older, something that clung to the memory, something that knew my fears. The windows glinted, their glass etched with faint lines, almost symbols, that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the path. The home wasn't just a shelter, it was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the doorstep stretching, its edges warping, as if the house was blinking, watching, waiting. The mirror by the entrance glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on the remains, but the faces were gone, the mirror empty, the silence heavier. The house wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The street loomed ahead, its pavement shadowed, but the air was wrong, heavy with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I saw flashes, voices in halls, footsteps on stairs, faces I didn't know but felt I should. Their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending, as if the house was warping. I stepped back, the yard a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the home was watching, waiting. The morning was a wait, its walls a canvas of leaves spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd lived. I was a witness, a child marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The daylight filtered through the trees, but the house disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to family, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The home was a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark, a mystery we carried forward. We got a family member to get rid of the remains and never saw it again after that night. The house's pulse was a weight, its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us out the door. The house was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that held us in its grip, a truth that changed us, a truth we couldn't unsee. Story number 3, The Mystery at Panda Express. The drive-thru hummed, its silence a mask for unseen dread. A voice spoke, warm, human, then vanished into nothing. Lights glowed in an empty restaurant, computers alive, yet still, doors locked. No one entered, no one left. Some places hold secrets that echo in the void. My parents are divorced, and I alternated between them weekly. A 15-year-old navigating their split. My dad picked me up from my mom's, suggesting Panda Express for lunch as my stomach growled. We pulled into the drive-thru, greeted by a voice, "Hi, my name's Rachel. How can I take your order?" It was human, not robotic, warm and clear. My dad placed our order, but Rachel didn't respond. The speaker silent. After 2 minutes, he asked, "Hello, are you there?" But no answer came. Another minute passed, the hum rising, a pulse in the air. Before we drove to the window, finding no one inside. The restaurant was empty, lights on, window closed, computer glowing, but no workers, no movement. We waited 3 minutes, hoping for someone to appear, but nothing stirred. My dad thought he saw someone enter, a fleeting shadow, but I saw no one. The vacant kitchen stark under the lights. We joked about a robbery or murder, laughter masking unease, but the possibilities felt real, their weight sinking in. My dad called my mom to report it, urging a police check, and we left for burgers elsewhere. The drive-thru silenced my truth. Returning later, we saw people peering through the windows, trying locked doors. The store open yet inaccessible, not closed by mistake. Hours later, we drove by again, finding no police, no staff, and customers waiting in the drive-thru, baffled. 5 passes confirmed the emptiness. No workers in sight. The lights unyielding. The hum roared. Rachel's voice, my mirror. Her last words await. I sought answers, scouring news for robberies or worse, finding nothing. No reports, no updates. The Panda Express a void. A 1980s forum post spoke of a restaurant, its staff gone, its lights a ritual, voices lingering. The hum named it glyphs. Faint, organic, warm on my skin, the dashboard, marking me a keeper of voids. Its voice a gate, our visited stage. I checked memories, fearing their fade. The computers glow my scar. We moved on, the house unchanged, but the drive-thru's hum clung, the empty window my fate. I wondered, Rachel's silence, a question unanswered. Its vanished echo a maze of unseen dread. The hum was my shadow, our new routines a frail shield against Rachel's silence. Her voice, its human warmth, cut me still. The empty restaurant, a wound in my soul. We never learned what happened. No news reports, no police updates. The store's void my truth. The locked doors, their unyielding bars, haunted me. The hum a vow I couldn't break. The restaurant was its own, its lights a shrine. The drive-thru's dark a kingdom, claiming all who passed. I heard her words, the voices echo eternal, the hum a pulse that scripted my fear. I hid thoughts racing, nights sleepless, but the hum sang, predicting my breaths. The windows glow in every shadow, the kitchen's void, its barren steel shone in my sleep, the computer's hum my air. I burned my questions, fearing its return, but the glyphs, warm, organic, spread on my skin, my walls, my eyes, a mark of its claim. The drive-through's line, its waiting cars, hummed in every silence. The jokes dread my mirror. I scoured tales, eateries abandoned, voices lost, no end. A 1970s log spoke of a keeper, its silence a prayer, its void a gift. The hum named it, its glyphs a city, its silence a gate, my wonder its song. I fled forward, chasing answers, but the hum roared, the glyphs a tide, the store's light in every dusk. The void choked me, its silence in every shadow, the locked door my noose. I burned my past, fearing its gaze, but the hum kept it, the windows dark my breath. I ran to schools, towns, but the lights glowed, the hum a broadcast, your its. My eyes shone, the glyphs my scar, my life a ritual it wove. The dad's call burned in my dreams, the restaurant's hum my fate, its silence my end. One night, the hum surged, a light at my window, white, empty, pulse still. I froze, hands still, watching its glow fading, dissolving into the dark. The hum was me, its glyphs my blood, the restaurant my world, its waiting, its silence a hymn, its void a place where answers die. I write to resist, but the hum scripts my words, its glyphs my chain, its voice my end. The mystery at Panda Express, claiming me forever in the dark. Story number 4, The Woods Watcher. The woodland stretched into a suffocating silence, the air thick with the scent of pine and a faint metallic tang. As I drove through the rural expanse, the road narrowing into a lonely stretch, the trees leaned in, their shadows shifting with a life of their own, and a chill ran through me, not from the night, but from an unseen presence. The isolation deepened, leaving me exposed. A force lingered, its intent threading through the darkness, marking me as prey in this forsaken wilderness. The car slowed at a stop sign, the engine's hum fading into a tension that made my breath catch as I rummaged through my purse. The quiet pressing against my ears, I paused, the air growing heavier, a weight that prickled my skin as I glanced up. My heart thudded as the silence warped. A figure emerging from the tree line, a sound that carried a threat. The seclusion of the remote farmland, miles from help, amplified my unease. No voices, no escape, just me and the entity approaching. Something was near, its presence a watcher I couldn't ignore. I pressed the gas, the tires crunching on gravel, when a sensation gripped me, a pull, a weight that dragged my gaze to the retreating figure. The air thickened, and his steady advance, his intent unseen, made my pulse race as I sped away. My breath caught as I gripped the wheel, the car a fragile shield, the danger closing in. The woods were no longer a home, they had become a hunting ground, and the watcher was drawing me into its sights. The search turned chilling, the air turning cold, a void settling as we returned with my neighbor to track the man. The footprints, too many, too deliberate, made my chest tighten with dread as we scanned the tree line. My hands shook as I stayed in the car. The neighbor's search, a lifeline. The entity's lair, a shadow I couldn't face. The night was a trap, and the watcher's presence pulled me into a fear I couldn't escape. The revelation left a lasting scar, the air pulsing with an unnatural chill as the truth emerged months later. The shed, the meat hooks, the caged woman, mocked my safety, and my heart pounded with the horror of near miss. My breath came in gasps as I armed myself. The woods, a constant threat. The farmland had turned against me, and the watcher's shadow lingered, a nightmare etched in every glance into the trees. I recently moved out in the middle of nowhere. I was about 5 minutes away from home when I stopped at the stop sign to look for a lighter in my purse. I noticed a man walking towards my car from the tree line and immediately drove off. It was pretty late at night, and my closest neighbor is about 10 minutes out from where I am. It's all woodland and farms. There's no good reason the man should have been out in the middle of nowhere like that. The pursuit revealed eerie signs. I picked up my neighbor who lives a few miles away, who had a couple of young daughters himself, and we went out to look for the man after reporting it to the police. We never found him, but there were footprints all around the tree line. I never got out of the car, but my neighbor, who was properly armed and protected, spent a good 30 minutes searching the area. The discovery turned horrific. Few months roll around, and they found the guy living on private property along with another man. They had been kidnapping young women for months and eating them alive and selling them on the black market. They used an abandoned shed as a slaughterhouse and had meat hooks hung everywhere. They found a missing woman naked and locked in a cage when authorities believed dozens of the missing women cases ended up there. The fear reshaped my life. It freaked me out for a while and still does. Being a woman, I'm usually extra careful anyway, but I definitely felt like this was a wake-up call to be extra precautious. I remember getting the Amber Alerts at least once every other week, all with the same description: long brown hair, around 5'3", blue eyes. I have long brown hair. I'm 5'2" and have blue eyes. Really creepy. The resolve brought new strength. After this happened, I made a point to become very familiar with firearms. I'm originally from Chicago, so that's saying something. Crime in the city is predictable. Crime in the South is straight up out of a horror movie. The tree line became a haunt. The man's approach, the footprints, the shed's horrors, all wove a tale of a night besieged by a human predator that clung to the wood's edges. The Amber Alerts, the matching description, hinted at a targeted threat, a danger I'd narrowly escaped. I armed myself, but the unease lingered, a scar on my life. The wilderness had turned hostile, and the watcher's shadow haunted every drive through the trees. The search fueled my dread. The neighbor's hunt, the empty tree line, marked a presence I couldn't dismiss. The locked shed, the meat hooks, painted a picture of evil, the watcher a thread I couldn't unravel. I stayed in the car, my heart racing, the farmland a cage of fear. The shadow was a warning, and its pull dragged me into a relief tempered by vigilance. The aftermath reshaped my peace. The woman's cage, the months of terror offered no closure. The crime's horror, a question that gnawed at me. The city's predictability, the South's unpredictability, suggested a new reality, a threat survived by luck. I shared the tale, a caution to others, the woods a mirror to survival. The watcher remained, a scar on my soul, a whisper of danger etched in every cautious step. Story number 5, the campfire voice. You gather by a campfire's glow, the night thick with a silence that isn't rest, a hum you can't trace. Not the crackle of logs or the murmur of friends, but a stillness that carries a stranger's tone. In 3 minutes, you'll hear a voice through static, a message that defies your words. This isn't a tale of ghostly apparitions or cursed woods. It's a riddle spoken from the unseen. What if the air around you carries a voice you never spoke? Join the summer camp night, where laughter hides a mystery. The fire drew us, but a child broke the calm. I worked at a summer camp where nights by the fire were our refuge after the kids slept. I used to work at a summer camp, and usually the kids would go to bed by 9 o'clock p.m. at the least, so the rest of us would just hang out around the fire. One night, a girl approached, claiming noise kept her awake. One night, one of the kids came to the fire pit, which was about 100 yards from the cabin, saying that she was having trouble sleeping because of the noise. I checked her cabin, suspecting our chatter. So I walk back with her and make sure everything is good in the cabin and come back to tell everyone to keep it down. Her return puzzled me. The noise a lie. She came back minutes later, still restless. Maybe 10 minutes later, she comes back and says that she still can't fall asleep. I escorted her again, doubting our volume. I walk back with her again, and in my head, I'm thinking that she's just being restless because we aren't being loud. The walkie-talkie held a secret, but anyway, I make sure she's under the covers and head back to the fire pit. Just as I'm about to get there, I realize that I left my walkie-talkie in her room. The voice spoke, not mine. Through the air, returning for it, I found her with the device. So I head back there and see that she's sitting upright in bed with the walkie-talkie in her hand. My colleagues heard a man's voice, crude and unknown. I head back to the fire pit, and the guys are like, "Why did you say that to her?" And they're like, "We heard you on the walkie-talkie tell her that she would look better if she shaved her head, that all the girls look better with shaved heads." I never spoke, yet the cabin stood silent. I never said that, but no one believed me. And it was obvious not her saying it either, since it was a grown man's voice. I rushed back, fear guiding me. The cabin offered no answers, just shadows. I rushed back to check on the cabin, and everything was normal. The girl slept, the walkie-talkie silent. The team's doubt fueled my unease. We debated the voice's source, a prank or a glitch, but the man's tone lingered. The night left a question unanswered. The fire's warmth couldn't erase the chill of that voice, a mystery woven into the camp's quiet nights. Story number 6. The stones of Highway 40. The mountain road twisted like a living thing, its wet asphalt glinting under my headlights, a path I shouldn't have taken. I chose Highway 49 over the interstate, pulled by a restless urge, a need to face the familiar curves of my past. The fog descended like a predator, its tendrils curling down from the peaks, swallowing the world in gray. That night, the silence was a deception, broken by something that didn't belong in the natural order. A stone appeared, centered in my lane, too perfect, too deliberate, as if placed by unseen hands. Was it chance, or had I driven into a ritual older than the road itself? Children's voices whispered thanks from the void, their gratitude laced with hunger, binding me to a mountain that refused to let me go. What did they need, and why do I hear them still, calling me back to the fog? The mountain road stretched ahead like a serpent's spine, its asphalt surface gleaming wet under my headlights. I'd ignored the safer interstate, drawn by the familiar curves of Highway 40, a choice fueled by nostalgia or the restless energy that had been eating at me for weeks, robbing me of sleep and peace. The fog had been building, slithering down from the peaks like fingers reaching for the valley below. What began as wisps dancing across my windshield grew into a thickened veil, alive with purpose. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel as I slowed to a crawl. The yellow lines folding into mere hints. That's when I saw it. A stone emerged from the gray, sitting perfectly centered in my lane as if someone had placed it there with deliberate precision. A basketball-sized, dark granite streaked with quartz veins that shimmered like frozen lightning. I braked hard. I hit the brakes harder than I should, the car lurching as the anti-lock system chattered beneath my feet. The silence that followed was absolute, devoid of wind, no distant traffic, no night sounds, only the tick of cooling metal and my own breathing, amplified in the car's confines. I stared at the stone. It was real, had to be real. Rocks were common here, road debris from unstable slopes, but something about its placement bothered me. Too perfect, too centered, as if it waited for me. Logic prevailed. I switched on my hazard lights and stepped into the fog. The air was thick and cold, scented with pine and something else, an unplaceable, organic and earthy odor. My footsteps seemed muffled, the fog swallowing sound. The stone was heavier than it looked, rough against my palms, warm against the chill. I moved it to the shoulder of the road, well clear of the travel lane. Then I heard them, voices, distant and thin, childlike, carried on air that had no breeze. Their tone unmistakably gratitude. The sound raised goosebumps along my arms and sent a chill down my spine. I scanned the fog, peering into the gray nothing that surrounded me. Nothing moved, nothing breathed except me. The voices faded as swiftly as they came, leaving doubt. Back in the car, I shook my head and tried to laugh at myself, blaming stress, fatigue, an auditory hallucination from sleepless nights and too much coffee. I drove on. The fog began to thin after a mile, revealing familiar landmarks, the old logging bridge, the scenic overlook. But soon it happened again. The fog returned, rolled in like a living thing, thick and purposeful. And there impossibly was another rock, identical in size, same placement, same perfect positioning in the center of my lane. My pulse raced, my heart hammered against my ribs as I brought the car to a stop. Oh, I hesitated. I didn't get out immediately, sitting with the engine running, wipers sweeping across the windshield uselessly. The stone waited, patient and immovable. When I stepped out, my hands shook as I lifted the sin again, that strange warmth against my palms. Again, those whispered voices drifted from the void, soft and grateful and impossible, saying, "Thank you, mister." I dropped the rock as if it had burned me, its impact sounding like breaking teeth. The voices stopped, the fog pulling back slightly, revealing empty road, empty forest. I kicked the rock to the shoulder with my foot, refusing to touch it. Instantly, the fog began to dissipate, clearing to show stars visible overhead and a normal and familiar road. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove on, checking my mirrors constantly, jumping at every shadow. My mind split between rational excuses, stress-induced hallucinations, sleep deprivation, and primitive instincts screaming danger. At the summit, I pulled into the parking area of an abandoned rest stop and called my wife. The call failed. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail, leaving me wordless. I didn't leave a message. Unsure how to explain rocks are following you or children's voices thanking me from nowhere. The descent started calmly. Clear skies, good visibility. But I was checking the road ahead obsessively. At the steepest section of the descent, I saw the fog bank waiting below, stretched across the road like a gray wall. My dread spiked. I realized I had a choice. Stop here and turn around or drive into the mist. I posed to stop. Then the fog began to move, flowing uphill like water, running backward, defying logic. I reversed, but the fog was faster, engulfing my car in a gray nothing that pressed against the windows like living things. The engine sputtered and died. In the sudden silence, the children's voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, spoke, grateful, waiting, needing something I'd given unknowingly. Through the windshield, I saw the stone, now larger, impossibly large, the size of a compact car, and perfectly spherical, blocking the road. It wasn't rolling, it was floating, inches above the asphalt, moving with fluid grace. The voices intensified, saying, "Thank you. Thank you for moving us. Thank you for helping. Thank you for being kind." But beneath was something hungry. The stone neared, revealing faces, dozens of them, pressed against the granite from the inside. Their mouths moved in synchronization with the voices, their eyes fixed on me, making my skin crawl. I fled. I've abandoned the car, stumbling through fog so thick I could barely see my own feet, crashing through underbrush and low-hanging branches. The voices followed, fainter but persistent, calling my name now in chorus. "Thank you, David. Thank you for being helpful. Thank you for being so kind." I never told them my name. I ran until collapse, crawled until I found a tree large enough to hide behind. The fog thinned, revealing other trees, a creek bed. My phone showed no signal, only the time. I waited until dawn, listening to the voices fade as the fog gradually dissipated. Returning, I found my car exactly where I had left it, engine running normally, no sign of any stone anywhere. The road was clear, the asphalt unmarked. At home, I went straight to the library and started researching. I uncovered that Highway 49 had been built in the 1960s, cutting through what had once been the town of Millfield, abandoned after mine collapses that had killed 37 people, including 16 children from the local school, lost when their bus was caught in a landslide. The tragedy struck on a foggy night at the steepest section of Highway 40. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, but every night since then, I dream of children's voices thanking me. On foggy nights, I find myself looking for rocks in the road, tempted to help again, fearing what would have happened if I had ignored that first stone. The fog calls. They're thanking me again, their voices soft and grateful and impossible, urging me to return. Story number 7, The Girl in the White Dress. You're alone in an old building and it's too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, daring you to make a sound. You move slowly, your footsteps echoing, but something else is here. Something that watches from the shadows, waiting for you to notice. The air feels wrong, heavy, like the building is holding its breath. You glance at the windows, dark and empty, but you swear you saw movement, a flicker, a face. You shake it off, focus on your work, but the feeling grows, crawling up your spine like a warning. Then you hear it, a sound from above, sharp and sudden, like something falling. It stops. then starts again, lighter, faster, like footsteps dancing across the floor. You freeze, your heart pounding, because you know you're supposed to be alone. You climb the stairs, each step louder than the last. The darkness pressing closer. The rooms are empty, the doors closed, but the sound lingers in your mind, a memory that doesn't belong. You tell yourself it's nothing, but deep down, you know something's here and it's not leaving. And then you hear the children's voices, soft and curious, asking about a girl no one else can see. She's in the corner, they say, in her white dress, watching. You'll never step foot in that building again, because some places aren't empty, even when they seem to be. I used to work for my dad, who was partially self-employed, doing regular maintenance and floor refinishing for a child care program called Head Start. My name was Alex, and I spent my summers hauling buckets and mops, learning the trade from Dad. The one center was in an old school which was built not long after the turn of the century and doubled as a church and another child care. It served as a church functions building in addition to housing Head Start and another child care. The building was ancient, its bricks weathered, its halls smelling of dust and time. We always did floors over the summer. Stripping and waxing floors was tedious but calming. The slow rhythm of the work almost meditative. Anyone who's stripped and waxed floors knows that when you're putting the coating back on, it's quiet and relaxing. That day, the building was ours alone, the kids and staff gone for the season. We were the only people in the building since it was midsummer weekend. But even before we stepped inside, something felt off. It felt off even before you entered, like something was watching you from the second floor windows. I'd glance up, expecting to see a face, but the windows were dark, reflecting only the gray sky. We were working in a large room, the kind with high ceilings and faded murals on the walls. Here we are slowly progressing across this huge room when a sound stopped us cold, a heavy thud from upstairs. Like a book hitting the floor, we hear a thunk upstairs and then stop. We paused, brushes in hand, listening. Then it came again, lighter, rhythmic, like someone skipping across the floor and back. Then it sounded like someone was skipping across the room and back. It stopped as suddenly as it started. Then it stopped again. Dad and I exchanged a look. His brow furrowed. But we finished the layer before heading up. So we finished the layer and went upstairs. The second floor was a maze of classrooms, their shelves stuffed with supplies, books, toys, art projects, blocking any clear path. Mind you, the upstairs was a few classrooms with shelves blocking direct movement from one end to the other, filled with supplies from the other classes. We checked every room, every corner, but found nothing. No one was up there. So we closed the doors and went downstairs to start the next room. I told myself it was the building settling, old wood creaking under the heat. But it happened again. We'd barely started when the sound returned. Thud, skip, pause, skip. Once again, this sound started, but this time I sprinted upstairs. My boots pounded the stairs, my heart racing, determined to catch whatever it was. The sound stopped before I reached the hall. But when I got there, my breath caught. All the doors were open at various angles. We'd closed them, I was sure of it. But now they gaped, inviting, like the building was playing a game. I checked again, empty, silent, the air thick with dust. We didn't hear the sound again that summer. We didn't hear the sound anymore that summer. But the building never felt right after that. Dad was practical. Not one for ghost stories, but even he seemed uneasy. My dad asked the child care advisor from the other end of the building if they heard any weird noises. She shook her head, said no, but then shared something that made my skin crawl. She said no, but the one day they were sitting down for snacks and a few kids were staring in a corner, the aide noticed, asked what they were looking at. The aide asked them what they were looking at, and one of the kids asked, "Why can't the girl eat with us?" She frowned, confused. The aide looked around and asked, "What girl?" The kid pointed, calm as anything, and the kid pointed to the corner and said, "The little girl with the white dress." That was it for me. I literally haven't set foot in the building since, and I have no desire to do so. I'd grown up on campfire tales, rolling my eyes at ghost stories. I used to think ghosts were for scary stories, but this was different. I have trouble believing this isn't real. The girl in the white dress wasn't just a story. She was there, in the skipping, the open doors, the eyes of those kids. I don't know who she was or why she stayed. Maybe she was tied to the school, to its church days, to some forgotten tragedy in those old walls. But I feel her still, in the quiet moments, when a sound doesn't belong. I've moved on, found other jobs, other places, but that building haunts me. I don't walk through empty halls anymore, don't trust silence that feels too deep. And sometimes, in the dark, I see her, a flicker of white, a shadow that skips just out of sight, waiting for someone to notice her again. Story number 8, The Ghostly Ruins of Ouray Inn. The air around the old inn was wrong, heavy with secrets that clung like damp rot. In a quiet Japanese town, the Ouray Inn stood abandoned, its silhouette a jagged scar against the twilight. No one came here anymore, not willingly. Teenager Kenta gripped his flashlight, heart thudding, as he stepped through the rusted gates. Something moved in the darkness, a whisper of cloth, a flicker of pale light. His friend Hana followed, her breath shaky. This place was cursed, they said, and tonight they'd learn the truth. The inn's windows stared like empty sockets, daring them to enter. Kenta's skin prickled as he crossed the overgrown path. Weeds nagging his shoes, every creak of the decayed wood felt like a warning. Hana clutched her camera, whispering, "We shouldn't be here." But Kenta pressed on, driven by the rumors, ghosts, murders, a restless spirit trapped within. The air grew colder, the shadows thicker, as if the inn itself were alive, watching inside. The darkness was suffocating. Dust swirled in their flashlight beams, revealing shattered furniture and peeling wallpaper. A faint hum vibrated through the floor, not mechanical, but alive, pulsing. Kenta's pulse raced. Was it his imagination, or did the shadows shift, stretching toward them? Hana gasped, pointing her camera at a doorway where a pale figure flickered, then vanished. This was no urban explorer's prank. This was something older, hungrier. The stories had warned them, but they didn't listen. There was an inn in my hometown, once a jewel of the town's booming tourism. It had crumbled into ruin. It was built in the 80s when Japan's economy was skyrocketing, but prosperity faded, and so did the inn's glory. After that period in our history, the inn suffered a decline in popularity, possibly due to increased tourism abroad and the fact that inns like this went out of style. Now, it was a forgotten relic, swallowed by time. Eventually, the lot and the inn were bought by a development company, and the inn finally and permanently closed its doors. Kenta had heard the tales from his grandfather, how the inn's fall mirrored the town's own decline. The odd thing was that the company that bought the inn and the land went bust. No one touched the land after that. No company or anyone got involved with the inn and the plot of land, and therefore lay there derelict and only served a purpose, a gloomy monument to its former glory. The inn became a ghost itself, hidden from the world. Kenta's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows on the walls. Now the darkness, weeds, and dense overgrowth had claimed the inn. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mold and something metallic. Hana's camera clicked, capturing a hallway that seemed to stretch impossibly long. A low moan echoed from the depths. Not wind, but something human, or once human. Kenta froze, his breath catching. The inn wasn't empty. Something lingered here, and it knew they were inside. In short, people said the place was haunted. The rumors had spread like wildfire. Ghostly lights, shadowy figures, whispers in the dark. One rumor started that the owner took his life when his business went under, and that if he went to visit, you may see his spirit at night. But Kenta's grandfather scoffed at that. I know that the owner sold the inn at the best possible chance before the bubble bursts, and that he was living very comfortably these days. Still, the stories persisted, fueled by the inn's decay. The truth was darker than the rumors. Kenta and Hana ventured deeper, their footsteps muffled by dust. A child's laughter rang out, sharp and unnatural, from a room with no doors. Hana's camera shook in her hands. "Kenta, we need to leave," she whispered. But he couldn't move, transfixed by a mirror at the hall's end. In its cracked surface, a woman's face stared back, not Hana's, but pale, eyeless, smiling. Kenta's scream lodged in his throat. The hum grew louder, a chant now, pulling at his mind. However, some of the locals have said that they have seen a pale light emanating from the inn, and that they have seen shadows pass by the window. Kenta had dismissed those as urban explorers' tricks. The owner of that mysterious shadow was likely an urban explorer, and that spooky glow of pale light, his flashlight. But now, standing in the inn's heart, he wasn't so sure. The air pulsed with malice, as if the walls themselves resented their presence. Hana's camera caught another flicker, a hand, skeletal, reaching from the darkness. The inn's history was a lie. Kenta realized it was actually featured in a magazine, and I couldn't believe it. The article had drawn thrill seekers, their flashlights piercing the night. The article interviewed an individual who had witnessed paranormal activity there. Kenta had laughed at the story, but now every word felt true. The interviewee was adamant that he saw an apparition in the inn, and here, in the suffocating dark. Kenta believed him. Escape was their only hope. Kenta grabbed Hana's arm, pulling her toward the exit. The inn fought back. Doors slammed shut. The hum became a scream, and the air grew thick, choking. They stumbled through the lobby, the woman's face from the mirror flashing in every reflective surface. Hannah sobbed, her camera abandoned. As the inn's presence clawed at their minds, they burst outside, collapsing in the weeds, the inn's silhouette looming behind them like a predator, triple-teated. Then, as time went by, the day of the demolition came, and the creepy, abandoned inn was no more. The town planned a shopping center, erasing the inn's curse. I don't know why, but I was kind of sad to see it go. Kenta felt it too, a strange grief for the place that nearly claimed them. A few days after the demolition work began, I saw police cars parked outside the abandoned inn. The news that night chilled him to the bone. You see, during the demolition, they found the skeletonized remains of a body, a woman, dead for years, hidden in the inn's walls. Initial reports concluded that the person had passed away between 6 to 10 years ago. Kenta's stomach twisted. Well, that coincides perfectly with when all the rumors began. The pale lights, the shadows, they weren't explorers. They were her trapped, screaming for release. Kenta never returned to the site, but Hannah's nightmares persisted, her camera lost in the inn's depths some nights. He swore that he heard that hum again, faint, carried on the wind. The Ure Inn was gone, but its ghosts were not. The town buried the story, eager to forget, but Kenta couldn't. What else lay hidden in those walls? The inn had been a tomb, a prison for something that refused to rest. Hannah stopped speaking of that night, but her eyes carried the weight of what they'd seen. Kenta avoided mirrors, fearing that pale, eyeless face. The Ure Inn had marked them, and its curse lingered, woven into their bones. Story number 9, The Sun Prayer's Curse. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stranger's gaze, cold and unrelenting, watching from the shadows. After a vibrant trip to Mexico, Elena and her boyfriend Marcus returned to their cozy apartment, unaware of the darkness they'd brought back. The air seemed heavier, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to emerge. Upon coming back, I was going through our suitcase to wash various items of clothing and came across a tiny statue of what looked like a woman on her knees, praying to the sun. Elena's fingers traced the rough wood, its carved eyes seeming to follow her. I asked Luke about this, and he said that him and another guy from the group of friends that we went with were out and saw it leaning against a tree stump. Marcus, ever the collector of oddities, had grinned, calling it a treasure. Him, being him, thought that this statue was the best thing since sliced bread, and he shoved it in his suitcase to bring it home with us. He set it on the hallway table, flanked by flickering candles, its presence jarring against the modern decor. Luke placed it on the table in the hallway in between our Yankee candles. That night, Elena woke to a faint hum like a distant chant echoing from the hallway. I was coming downstairs through the hallway and into our living room when I noticed that it seemed colder by the table. The chill wasn't from a draft. It clung to her skin, heavy with intent. She dismissed it, closing the living room door, but the cold followed, seeping into her dreams. By morning, her keys, always hung in the kitchen, lay in the center of the living room rug as if placed with purpose. My keys that I always put on a hook in the kitchen would be in the middle of the living room floor, resting on the rug when I would wake up. Was the statue more than a souvenir? Or had they invited something ancient into their home? The hum grew louder each night. No longer a sound, but a presence. Curling around Elena's thoughts like smoke, we have no pets. And I know Luke wouldn't do something so petty to try and mess with me. Marcus noticed it too, though he hid his unease behind jokes. The hallway became a place to avoid. Light bulbs flickered, then died out. No matter how often they were replaced, I had to keep changing light bulbs in the hallway. The phone on the table rang at odd hours, its static crackling with faint, guttural murmurs. The phone that was also on this table would go off randomly at all times of the day. I'd answer and hear static. Sometimes I'd hear faint mumbling over it. Elena's sleep was no refuge. She'd find the statue under her pillow, its wooden surface warm, as if it had been held. There were times when I would get ready for bed and just about to lay my head down on the pillow, and I'd pull out that wooden statue. Somehow, it had made its way under my pillow. She began researching, uncovering tales of a pre-Aztec cult that worshipped a sun deity through blood offerings. Their idols cursed to bind spirits. The statue matched the descriptions, crudely carved, yet alive with intent. One night, alone, Elena watched TV, the screen's glow, her only comfort. I was home alone one night, watching TV in the living room, when I saw a shape of black smoke in the hallway lingering there as if it were watching me. The smoke wasn't a trick of light. It pulsed, its edges sharpening into a humanoid form. It was in the TV reflection. I dared not move my head towards it and acted like I was totally engrossed in the show I was watching. Her heart thundered, but she kept still, the shape drifting closer, its presence suffocating. I could see it from the corner of my eye, though, but was too afraid to move. It retreated, dissolving into the hallway. But Elena knew it wasn't gone. She needed Marcus to believe her, to face what they'd unleashed. In the McDonald's parking lot, over melting McFlurries, she spilled everything. When my boyfriend got home, I asked him if he wanted to go grab McDonald's to get a McFlurry. Sitting there in the car park, I blurted out the events of the night. Marcus's face paled. He'd seen the smoke, too, lingering in their bedroom doorway at dawn. He sat quietly. I expected him to not believe me and laugh, but Luke said that he had seen the smoke, too. But sometimes it was in the doorway when he woke up. The statue wasn't just haunted. It was a doorway, and something was stepping through. Elena and Marcus pored over online forums, finding stories of cursed artifacts smuggled from sacred sites. The cult's idols, they learned, were vessels, binding spirits that demanded loyalty or vengeance. We thought about the timeline and realized that all of this happened shortly after finding the statue in the suitcase. The house grew darker, its warmth drained, the air thick with the scent of ash. Elena tried moving the statue to the garage, but it reappeared on the table by morning, untouched. She dreamed of a woman, her face carved like the statue's, chanting in a language that burned her mind. The smoke appeared nightly now, no longer content to watch. It touched her, its cold fingers grazing her skin as she slept. Marcus found scratches on the hallway floor, forming symbols from the cult's rituals. That night, when we got back, but We took the statue into the garden and burnt it. They built a fire in the backyard. The statue's wood resisting the flames at first, then erupting in a blaze that hissed like a scream. The smoke rose, not black, but blood red, coiling into the sky before dissipating. The house exhaled, its walls seeming to expand, the chill lifting like a fever breaking. Nothing happened since, and the house somehow feels lighter and warmer. Elena and Marcus never spoke of it again, but she kept a salt line by the door just in case. The dream stopped, but sometime, in the quiet, she heard a faint hum, distant yet persistent. Had they destroyed the curse or merely sent it back to where it came from? Story number 10, The Shadow. Behind the smile. Some smiles hide something darker. The restaurant buzzed with life, clinking dishes, laughter, the hum of conversation. But beneath it all, there was a stillness, a quiet that clung to the edges of the room. I'm a 16-year-old girl and work as a waitress at a restaurant, navigating trays and orders with a nervous grin. The place was a maze of tables, each section a small kingdom for us servers. I was new, still learning the ropes, but I loved the chaos, or so I thought. Ever notice how some people seem to appear exactly where you don't want them? My section was in the back, near the swinging kitchen doors. Each waiter/waitress has a certain section of tables to serve. I'd weave through, balancing plates, smiling at customers, but there was one pair of eyes I couldn't shake. One of the janitorial workers would make small talk with me, his voice soft, almost too friendly. He'd mop the floors in my section, lingering longer than needed. I didn't think anything of it, just a coworker being chatty, right? He'd talk to me fairly often, as I would often see him working in my section when I'd come out to clear tables. I brushed it off as coincidence, my mind on tips and orders. Trust can blind you to the truth. The other waitresses, girls my age, were my lifeline. There are a lot of other girls around my age who also work as waitresses. We'd trade stories, laugh about rude customers, and steal fries from each other's plates. I'm fairly friendly with my co-workers, so I didn't question the janitor's presence. But something about him started to feel off. His conversations were too frequent, his gaze too steady. I figured it was pure coincidence. Yet every shift, he was there, sweeping, wiping, watching. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired. What do you do when safety feels like a lie? One evening, I slipped into the back room to scarf down my dinner. The space was dim, cluttered with crates and spare aprons. I was taking a break in the back room eating my dinner when he appeared. The janitor guy walked in and sat down at the table behind me. His chair scraped the floor, and he offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He sat again, made small talk, literally nothing super important. I nodded, chewing my pancakes, trying to focus on my food. Then another waitress, Sarah, burst in, her laugh bright and loud. One of the other girls walked in, and we began to chat for a while. She sat across from me, diving into a story about a spilled milkshake. The janitor left soon after, his footsteps fading. I barely noticed. The truth doesn't always scream. It whispers. Sarah and I kept talking, the room feeling lighter with her there. While I was cleaning up, I thanked the girl for talking to me. She paused, her smile fading She said, "Oh, I just came in to make sure you weren't alone. No one should be alone with him." Her words hit like ice water. My fork froze mid-air. She leaned closer, her voice low, and told me the truth. I later learned from the other teenage girls that the guy had a habit of pestering them, being generally creepy and following them to their car. While he was a middle-aged man, he'd linger in their sections, wait by the parking lot, his presence a shadow they couldn't shake. I was freaked out. My mind raced, replaying every moment. I'm 80% sure the dude was following me around while I worked in my section. The restaurant didn't feel the same after that. Every shift became a game of vigilance. I'd scan my section, checking for his silhouette near the kitchen or lurking by the trash cans. The other girls shared their stories, how he'd ask personal questions, stand too close, or happen to be near their cars at closing. So, to the creepy janitor dude, please get lost. But it wasn't that simple. He was still there. His smile, a mask I couldn't unsee. I started carrying my keys between my fingers, my heart racing every time I left the building. The parking lot, once just a stretch of asphalt, now felt like a trap. I confided in my manager, a gruff woman who'd seen it all. She listened, her face hardening, and promised to keep an eye out. But the restaurant was busy, and he was clever, slipping through the cracks of our complaints. Every clatter of dishes made me jump. Every shadow in the corner felt like him. The girls formed a pact. Never walk to our cars alone, never linger in the back room. We'd check on each other, a silent code born of fear. Sarah became my shadow, her presence a shield I didn't know I needed. One night, I caught him watching me from across the dining room. His mop was still, his eyes locked on mine. I froze, my tray trembling in my hands. Another waitress, Mia, noticed and spilled a glass of water by accident, pulling his attention away. That's when I knew we weren't just imagining it. The girls told me he'd been written up before, but nothing stuck. He was too careful, his actions just shy of provable. The manager couldn't fire him without cause, and he knew it. I started digging into his past, asking around discreetly. A former waitress, now in college, warned me he'd followed her for weeks before she quit. She'd seen him outside her apartment once, just standing under a streetlight. The memory of his smile made my skin crawl, a reminder that some threats don't need words. I stopped eating in the back room, started parking closer to the entrance. But the fear lingered, a weight I carried through every shift. The restaurant still buzzes with life, but for me, it's a battlefield. I don't know if he'll ever stop, but I know I won't let him win. The girls and I watch out for each other, our bond forged in shared unease. We've learned to spot the signs, the too long glances, the convenient coincidences. So, to the creepy janitor dude, please get lost. But I'm not waiting for him to listen. I'm watching, waiting, ready to fight back. Story number 11, The Highway's Trap. The breeze soothed, but betrayal burned. At P2, I lived with my husband on a sprawling ranch where we both worked. Its isolation, a stark contrast to the city. I got off work early from my second job, the cool breeze hitting my face, cooling me down as I drove up the long driveway. The drive home was serene, the night's creatures alive in the forest that cradled our house. It was dark, desolate, and just had a completely different feel at night. The creatures of the night howling and chirping, the shadows of all the trees dancing in the headlights. Stepping onto the porch, an unease pricked my skin, and opening the door revealed my worst fear, my husband and another bear on the couch. I made it to my front porch and something just felt off. They were there on the couch, completely naked. The world blurred and my heart shattered. The road called and pain drove. An hour of screams and tears ended us. I packed my black Honda, gravel spitting as I fled. The next hour was a complete blur of shouting, crying, and him begging me to listen. I packed up everything I could in my small black Honda, spiraling gravel into the house, and sped back down the same driveway. The 4-hour drive to my dad's house, my sanctuary, was my only thought. A child's need for comfort consuming me. It was about a 4-hour drive back to my dad's house, my safe space. I wanted my dad. Reverting back to my 10-year-old self, the highway stretched dark, my mind replaying the betrayal, oblivious to my broken gas gauge. The night swallowed me, and I didn't see the danger ahead. The car died, and fear awoke. My car sputtered, out of gas, on a 3-lane highway, forcing me into a narrow bike lane by a retaining wall. The car started to sputter and cut out in the absolute worst of places possible. I was on a 3-lane highway. The only place to pull my car over was a tiny bike lane, buted up to a retaining wall. Semis roared past, shaking my car. The windshield's cracked, spidering wider. A couple of semis had passed me. They passed so close that my entire car shook. It shook so hard that the crack in my front windshield started to spread haphazardly across it. Hazards on, I felt trapped, alone in the desolate night. The road wasn't empty. It was waiting. I was scared at this point, and I didn't know what to do. The strangers offered, and dread grew. A small SUV slowed on the opposite side, making an illegal U-turn to pull beside me, carrying 2 teen boys and 2 girls. A car on the opposite side of the highway slowed down and make an illegal U-turn across 3 desolate lanes. The small SUV pulls up next to my window. The driver asked what happened, offering to take me to a gas station. After I explained my plight, the guy driving asked me what happened. I gave them a brief rendition of the story, and he then offered to drive me to the nearest petrol station. Hesitant but desperate, I climbed in, clutching my purse. I was hesitant at first, but quickly realizing my current situation, I reluctantly obliged. At a Walmart lot, the others left abruptly, leaving me with the driver, who veered not to a gas station, but a dark alley. His kindness was a mask, and I was his prey. The needle lied, and I survived. In the alley, he parked, claiming to need insulin, but pulled out drug paraphernalia, not medicine. He suddenly turns down a dark, dimly lit alleyway and just parked the car and says nonchalantly, "Hey, I just need to park here for a minute and take my insulin." It wasn't insulin, it was drug paraphernalia. 2 men lurked behind a dumpster, and fear surged. I caught a glimpse of 2 skinny men clumsily trying to duck behind a dumpster behind us in the alley. I pleaded, spilling my life's tragedies, my brother's suicide, my husband's betrayal, until something shifted in him. I started telling him my tragic life story, like how my brother had killed himself. I told him about my cheating husband and the fact that I just wanted to get home and be with my dad. He sped back to my car, tossed a half-full gas can in my purse. Warning: don't ever get into someone's car you don't know. And vanished. I lived, but the highway's lesson scars me still. Don't ever get into someone's car you don't know. Now get the hell out of here. Story number 12. Whispers beyond the silent bridge. The forest near the camp loomed like an ancient guardian, its dense canopy, hiding truths no camper should uncover, its leaves glinting under the night's pale glow, casting shadows that danced with a life of their own. I ventured inside. The air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Pine, earth, something older, something that clung to the air, something that knew my name. The trail stretched, its path warping as if the woods themselves were bending time, its edges alive with a pulse I couldn't name. I was no stranger to adventure, but this was different. This was alive. This was a truth that pulsed in the dark. The trees creaked, their branches groaning as I moved, their sound a rhythm that stirred in the silence, a rhythm that wasn't mine. The mirror-like pond nearby glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my pack. But the faces were gone, the water still, the silence heavier. The forest wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. I pressed deeper. The woods stretching ahead, their shadows bending as if the camp was watching, waiting. The moonlight flickered, its beams warping into patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air grew denser, thick with a weight that pressed against my mind, a weight that followed me. The forest wasn't mine. It belonged to something else, something that stirred in the shadows. The night deepened, the camp's pulse a drumbeat under my steps, its silence a predator. I carried my gear, a frail shield against the unknown, but the trees disagreed, their branches alive with mystery. I was a witness, a staff member, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The wind murmured, the woods a canvas of lives spent and lost, its paths holding echoes of those who'd ventured here. I was no stranger to survival, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The forest was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that held me. I worked at a Boy Scout camp for 2 years in high school as a summer gig. A requirement for the Scouts is to earn their Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. And for this, they had to set up shelters along with other activities. Before I was staff, the Scouts would go 12 miles into the woods for their night out to a place called Shelby's Dream. The stories of kids waking up screaming, talking about seeing a ghost running at them and being hung from trees and other wild experiences were many. The forest's pulse was a spark, its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the trail. The forest shadows deepened as we hiked, the trail's pulse a drumbeat under my boots, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my map, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Pine, earth, something older, something that clung to the trees, something that knew my fears. The canopy glinted, its leaves etched with faint lines, almost symbols, that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the path. The woods weren't just a landscape, they were a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the bridge stretching, its edges warping as if the forest was blinking, watching, waiting. The reflective stream nearby glinted, its surface warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my pack, but the faces were gone, the water still, the silence heavier. The forest wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The path loomed ahead, its shadows deepened, but the air was wrong, heavy, with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I heard flashes, rustles in bushes, whispers on wind, faces I didn't know but felt I should, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the woods were warping. I stepped back, the trail of frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the forest was watching, waiting. The night was a wait, its trees a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd ventured. I was a witness, a staff member, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the leaves, but the forest disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to badges, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The woods were a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark. Everyone wrote those kids off and called them crazy. Eventually, there were things people couldn't explain, such as staff members waking up with scratches and cuts on their body. The backstory of the place is that there was a mass killing of Southern soldiers during the American Civil War, and Shelby was the daughter of the Southern captain who was hung with all his men. She supposedly came back to the camp to find her father and all his men hung from the trees. We stopped sending the group to that location a few years back. The forest's pulse was a weight. It shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the bridge. The stream glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just us, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine, eyes that pulsed in the dark. The forest shadows followed us as we crossed, the bridge's pulse a drumbeat under my feet. But the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my courage, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Pine, earth, something older, something that clung to the trees, something that knew my fears. The canopy glinted, its leaves etched with faint lines, almost symbols, that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the path. The woods weren't just a landscape, they were a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the stream stretching, its edges warping as if the forest was blinking, watching, waiting. The reflective surface glinted, its image warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my pack, but the faces were gone, the water still, the silence heavier. The forest wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The trail loomed ahead, its silence deepened, but the air was wrong, heavy, with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I heard flashes, rustles in underbrush, murmurs on wind, faces I didn't know but felt I should, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the woods were warping. I stepped back. The bridge, a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the forest was watching, waiting. The night was await, its trees a canvas of leers, spent and lust, holding echoes of those who'd ventured. I was a witness, a staff member, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the branches, but the forest disagreed. Its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to survival, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The woods, it were a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark. One night, my cabin mates and I went out there to see if the rumors were true about that place. I heard voices, cries, and screams that echoed into the forest. There's a point where you cross a bridge, and once over the bridge, the wilderness stops. The woods continue, but there's no noise for animals or insects. Absolute silence. The forest's pulse was a weight. Its shadows a truth that lingered in the air, a truth that followed us to the silence. The stream glinted, its reflection warped, showing not just us, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine, eyes that pulsed in the dark. And it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. The forest was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that held us in its grip, a truth that changed us, a truth we couldn't escape. The forest shadows lingered as we listened, the silence's pulse a drumbeat in my ears, but the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my unease, the air, heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Pine, earth, something older, something that clung to the tree, something that knew my fears. The canopy glinted, its leaves etched with faint lines, almost symbols that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the peak. The woods weren't just a landscape, they were a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the trails stretching, its edges warping as if the forest was blinking, watching, waiting. The reflective stream glinted, its surface warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my pack. But the faces were gone, the water still, the silence heavier. The forest wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The bridge loomed ahead, its silence deepened. But the air was wrong, heavy, with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory not my own. I heard flashes, rustles in underbrush, murmurs on wind, faces I didn't know but felt I should. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the woods were warping. I stepped back, the path of frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the forest was watching, waiting. The night was a weight, its trees a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd ventured. I was a witness, a staff member, marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The darkness filtered through the leaves, but the forest disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to adventure, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The woods were a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark. The forest shadows followed us as we retreated, the camp's pulse a drumbeat under our feet. But the silence was a predator, its truths whispering in the dark. I carried my thoughts, the air heavy with a scent I couldn't place. Pine, earth, something older, something that clung to the memory, something that knew my fears. The canopy glinted, its leaves etched with faint lines, almost symbols, that glowed faintly before fading, casting eerie patterns across the path. The woods weren't just a landscape, they were a witness, a keeper of secrets, a truth that pulsed in the dark. I paused, the trail stretching, its edges warping as if the forest was blinking, watching, waiting. The reflective stream glinted, its surface warped, showing not just me, but fragments of others, faces I didn't know, eyes that weren't mine. I blinked, my heart a drum, my breath catching, my hands trembling on my pack. But the faces were gone, the water still, the silence heavier. The forest wasn't empty, it was full, brimming with a presence I couldn't name, a truth I couldn't escape. The camp loomed ahead, its lights shadowed. But the air was wrong, heavy with a pressure behind my eyes, a feeling like a memory, not my own. I heard flashes, rustles in underbrush, murmurs on wind, faces I didn't know but felt I should. Their eyes had hollow, their mouths moving without sound. The moonlight danced, its glow bending as if the woods were warping. I stepped back, the path a frail refuge, but the shadows lingered, their edges too sharp, too alive, as if the forest was watching, waiting. The morning was await, its trees a canvas of lives spent and lost, holding echoes of those who'd ventured. I was a witness, a staff member marked by a secret I couldn't unknow. The daylight filtered through the branches, but the forest disagreed, its shadows lingering, its pulse a drumbeat that followed me. I was no stranger to survival, but this was alive, a truth I couldn't escape. The woods were a record, a mystery that pulsed in the dark, a mystery we carried forward. Story number 13, The Silent Man. The hotel's neon buzzed, masking a darkness that lingered. A man's calm voice hid a storm no eyes could see. His key fell, a quiet act of surrender. Chaos lay behind him, a room torn by unseen rage. Some guests leave more than footprints, they leave ghosts. I work the graveyard shift as a night auditor at a hotel. Nights blending into paperwork and odd guests, a routine of monotony under fluorescent lights. One night stood out, shaking me to my core, a memory that clings like damp air. It began routinely, buried in sales reports, half-focused, when a man approached the desk, ordinary, polite, asking for a gas station within walking distance. I gave directions, his nod calm, his thanks soft. And he walked into the night, unremarkable, fading from thought. 20 minutes later, a woman burst into the lobby, frantic, breathless, eyes wide with panic, rushing to me, asking if I'd seen her son. Her description, build, clothes, face matched the man, my stomach sinking as she shook, saying he'd called, threatening to take his life after a fight with his girlfriend, heading to a nearby freeway overpass. He reappeared, silent, walking past without a glance, tossing his room key onto the counter, a hollow act. I hadn't seen him enter, likely through the side entrance, his belongings clutched. No words, no emotion. I checked his reservation. No phone, no emergency contact, paid in cash, a clean record on paper, a ghost in our system. Police arrived, the mother's panic pulling them in. And I explained 3 times to an officer. I didn't know him, couldn't contact him, had spoken once. His composure chilling. He showed no tears, no anger. His calm a mask over a void I couldn't grasp. His room was trashed, curtains ripped, lamps broken, mirror shattered, a storm's aftermath. Yet he stood before me, unruffled, a contradiction that burned. The hum rose, a pulse in the lobby's stale air. His keys clatter echoing in my skull. I juggled guests, reports unfinished, the officer's questions looping, my mind on his silent walk, his face a blank slate. The mother's panic, her trembling voice, was my mirror, the overpass's shadow a weight. I checked locks, fearing he'd return, his calm a threat, the room's chaos, my truth. I researched suicides, finding tales, guests vanishing, rooms destroyed, no answers. A 90s article spoke of a man calm before the leap. His mirror shards a ritual, the hum confirmed it, glyphs, faint, organic, warm on my skin, the desk, naming him a wanderer of voids, his key a surrender, my night his stage. The hum was my shadow, the hotel's lights a frail shield against his void. His calm nod, his tossed key cut me still, the room's wreckage a scream in my dreams. I don't know his fate, whether police reached him before the overpass claimed him, a question unanswered, gnawing for years. The mother's panic, her wide eyes, haunts me. The overpass's edge, my mirror. The hotel changed, its lobby colder, the desk a grave for his key, marking all who stood there. I felt his presence, the silent man's gaze eternal, the hum a vow I couldn't break. I quit, seeking brighter shifts, but the hum followed, predicting my steps. The keys clatter in every silence. The shattered mirror, its jagged teeth, glowed in my sleep. The curtain's tears my own. I burned my uniform, fearing his shadow. But the glyphs, warm, organic, spread on my skin, my walls, my eyes. A mark of his claim. The lobby's smoke, its stale air hummed in every breath. The sirens wailed. My truth. I scoured records, guests lost, rooms ravaged, no end. A Himmedy's log spoke of a wanderer, his key a curse, his chaos a prayer. The hum named him, its glyphs a city, his silence a gate, my fear his song. I fled south, chasing sun, but the hum roared. The glyphs a TI, the desk's echo in every breeze. The wreckage choked me, his eyes in every shadow. The keys fall my noose. I burned my notes, fearing his gaze, but the hum kept him. The overpass's void, my breath. I ran to flats, towns, but the keys fell. The hum a broadcast, you're his. My eyes glowed, the glyphs my scar, my life a ritual he carved. The siren's hope was dust, the hotel's chain my fate, his nod my end. One night, the hum surged, a man at my window, silent, unblinking, his key glinting. I fled, hands shaking, to the car, his shadow still fading into the dark. The hum was me, its glyphs my blood. The hotel, my world, he's waiting. His silence a hymn, his void a place where life dies. I write to resist, but the hum scripts my words, its glyphs my chain, his key my end, the silent man claiming me forever in the night. Story number 14, The Chaplain's Fall. The Catholic school halls echoed with a deceptive calm, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and a faint tension as I passed the chaplain's office, the walls seeming to close in with unspoken secrets. The silence pressed against my ears, and a chill ran through me, not from the draft, but from an unseen threat. The students' chatter faded, leaving me exposed. A force lingered, its intent threading through the trust, marking me as a witness to a hidden betrayal. The chapel's pews creaked under the weight of confessions, the air growing heavy with a tension that made my breath catch as I sought guidance. I paused, the atmosphere shifting, a weight that prickled my nerves as rumors swirled. My heart thudded as the calm warped, a whisper of doubt rising from the shadows, a sound that carried danger. The isolation of the school's inner circle, cut off from scrutiny, amplified my unease. No allies, no escape, just me and the entity stirring behind the chaplain's smile. Something was near, its presence a fall I couldn't foresee. I approached the chaplain's door, the wood groaning under my knock, when a sensation gripped me, a pull, a weight that dragged my gaze to his troubled eyes. The air thickened, and his kindness, too forced, masked a burden, making my pulse race with suspicion. My breath caught as I listened, the school a stage for a hero's unraveling. The community was no longer a sanctuary, it had become a trap, and the fall was drawing me into its depths. The brothers' instability cast a shadow, the air turning cold, a void settling as the chaplain took them under his wing. Their sudden rages, his financial strain made my chest tighten with dread as the truth began to twist. My hands shook as I recalled his help. The family's plot, a weight I couldn't lift. The school a battleground of trust. The night was a betrayal, and the fall pulled me into a horror I couldn't escape. The revelation left a chilling legacy, the air pulsing with an unnatural chill as the chaplain's name was tarnished. The fabricated rape, the cancer's end, mocked his sacrifice, and my heart pounded with the injustice of his fate. My breath came in gasps as I mourned, the school a scar on my faith. The community had turned against him, and the fall's shadow lingered, a tragedy etched in every memory of his kindness. I went to a Catholic school, and we had a school chaplain who was essentially some sort of friend to the kids. It sounds really creepy when you say it like that, but the dude was goddamn amazing. He talked multiple students out of suicide, helped tons of kids come to terms with and overcome bullying, harassment, and sexual domestic abuse, as well as encouraging every single student to reach for their dreams. The trust turned to suspicion. Anyway, he once went the extra mile for a very troubled family at my school. The two kids in question were adopted brothers and both incredibly unstable. The brothers would be your best friend one second and then suddenly fly off the handle the next, making you literally fear for your own life. Anyway, knowing their family problems, the school chaplain volunteered to become the two boys' godfathers in order to legally be able to help them and their family out financially. The arrest shattered the peace. About a year after I finished school, the school chaplain appeared in the local newspapers. He had been arrested for imprisoning and raping the older of the two lads. For most people, that was enough to condemn him. But most of the people I went to school with found the whole thing somewhat suspicious. Whenever someone encountered one of the two boys, they would instantly launch into a step-by-step recount of exactly what happened, as if desperate to convince everyone they knew that they were telling the truth. The truth emerged too late. The only thing wrong is that these step-by-step accounts were usually vastly different each time they were told, as if poorly thought out. Regardless, the chaplain imprisoned and eventually died of cancer while still inside. It was only after his death that it finally came out that the rape never happened. The chaplain had run into financial trouble himself, and so was unable to keep giving the boys' family money as punishment. The legacy left a bitter taste. The whole family. Yes, the parents were the ones who came up with the idea, invented the story of rape to teach him a lesson. The guy was a hero. He even helped my girlfriend at the time get through her parents' divorce in one piece. And yet, his lot in life wound up with him sad, forgotten, name besmirched, and alone to die of cancer in prison. The school's silence became a haunt. The chaplain's arrest, the boy's lies, the family's plot, all wove a tale of a life betrayed that clung to the hall's echoes. The inconsistent stories, the cancer's end, hinted at a fabricated doom, a danger I couldn't avert. I mourned his loss, but the unease lingered, a scar on my trust. The community had turned hostile, and the fall's shadow haunted every memory of his guidance. The trust fueled my doubt. The suicide talks, the financial aid, marked a man I admired. The brother's rage, the parents' scheme, painted a picture of manipulation. The chaplain in a pawn I couldn't save. I questioned his fate, my heart racing, the school a cage of regret. The fall was a warning, and its pull dragged me into a relief tempered by guilt. The aftermath reshaped my faith. The hero's death, the truth's delay, offered no closure. The injustice, a question that gnawed at me. The girlfriend's healing, the forgotten name, suggested a lost legacy, a threat survived by silence. I shared the tale, a caution to others, the school a mirror to vigilance. The fall remained, a scar on my soul, a whisper of betrayal etched in the chapel's quiet. Story number 15, The Silent Clank. You lie in bed, the night thick with a clatter that isn't traffic, a sound with intent, not the hum of a quiet street or the rustle of wind, but a metallic echo that pierces sleep. In 3 minutes, you'll see a figure under a light that shouldn't be, a shadow with purpose. This isn't a tale of ghostly moans or flickering lamps. It's a glimpse into a mystery that shifts reality. What if the noise you hear marks a watcher you can't unsee? Step to your window, where the residential calm turns eerie. The clank jolted me awake. A metal crush? I rested in my second-floor bedroom when a heavy metallic sound broke my sleep. This happened around 10 years ago, and it's something that regularly plays on my mind. I was falling asleep, but then I was awoken by the sound of something heavy and metallic clanking against something. It repeated, a rod striking something dense. Not 30 seconds had passed when I heard the sound again. Since I had another chance to hear the sound, I now thought that it sounded like a metal pole or rod smashing against something heavy and dense. The rhythm unnerved me. It continued. It seemed like it was occurring every 30 seconds or so. I peered out, drawn to the unknown. Curiosity forced me to the window in my usually quiet neighborhood. I had to take a look outside. It was so weird, and I was very curious. My bedroom was on the second floor, and it faced the street. I lived in a residential area back then. No source was clear. The street empty. Until I saw him, I was looking out the window, and for a while, I couldn't even figure out where the noise was coming from. It looked as if there were no one on the streets. Well, that's what I thought until I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road about 3 houses away. His stillness chilled me. It was a man. He was slightly illuminated between the yellow street lights. The bags hinted at danger. A red flag waved. He stood like a statue, surrounded by black garbage bags. At the man's feet were about 5 garbage bags, all black. They seemed to surround him. The wrong color sparked suspicion. It was strange because in our area, we were told by the council to use a yellowish garbage bag. A body shape twisted my gut. This is where things get really weird. I thought at one point the garbage bags he was standing over sort of looked like a body. The night faded, but the mystery could deepen. He stood unmoving. The clank ceased. Exhaustion won. I must have stared at the man for about 10 to 15 minutes and he didn't move a muscle. The metal sound stopped after a while and I was too tired to figure out what was happening there. So went to bed. Morning rushed me out, memory delayed. I woke up the next morning late for work and headed out in a rush. It wasn't until dark when I returned. The house vanished. The light alive. Just as I was turning my key in the lock, I remembered the events of the night before. I looked across at the home that the man was seemingly stood in front of. Strange thing was, it was pitch black out and I couldn't see the house I'd seen the night before. The truth sank in. No streetlight stood where it glowed. A phantom scene. Then I figured out why I couldn't see him. There was no streetlight anywhere near that house. I ran upstairs and looked out my window, thinking that my eyes had deceived me. But when I pulled the curtain back, my spine went ice cold. There was no street light opposite that house. I know I saw him. The impact real. I don't care what anyone says. I saw that man under a yellow street light in front of the house. I know it wasn't a dream. Life darkened after that gaze, and I still have no idea how that happened. All I know is that my life went downhill fast after I laid eyes on him. I seek answers. The night etched in me. If anyone has any theories, I'm all ears. I can't get that night out of my head. Story number 16, The Haunting of the Abandoned Asylum. The abandoned town in Canada's wilderness was a ghost of its past. Its crumbling buildings whispering tales of forgotten lives. I grew up in this nowhere place, where boredom drove me and my friends to seek thrills in the decaying shells of old structures. The mental hospital, once paired with a daycare I'd attended as a child, loomed largest in our dares. Its shuttered halls, a siren call for adventure. That night, fog and rain cloaked the world, turning our laughter into echoes of unease as we breached its gates. A crash from the psych ward's depths silenced our bravado, pulling us into a maze of rusted doors and rotting air. Was it the building's decay? Or had we stumbled into the lair of something or someone still clinging to its shadows? In a blood-soaked room, a man's twisted grin and chilling words shattered our courage, forcing a desperate flight from a nightmare we'd never unsee. What was he doing there? And why do I still hear his whispers in the dark? I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada, in an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us. So what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Before this incident, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. We'd seen a small bit of blood-like liquid or a pentagram on the grounds from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad till the last time I had gone exploring. As a child, I used to go to a daycare that was part of a mental hospital, an odd pairing, but it closed down to a lack of patience and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends, a group of thrill seekers. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We were in a group of 5. The scene was eerie, fog, and it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We reached the main gate, which was padlocked shut, and decided to help each other hop over it, and made a ton of noise, laughing and giggling the whole time. Unsuspecting of what was to come, we explored the small play place and park area with the flashlights that we had on our person. But our visibility was rather limited. Curiosity pulled us inside. We decided to enter the decaying building. Inside, glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. Remnants lingered, old Legos and wood chips from the previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys thrown about. As we ventured deeper, the further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I spotted some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room, and as I walked over to pick them up, a loud crash erupted from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. We froze. My friends and I all looked at each other. My friend Brian, ever daring, suggested that we go to look and see where the sound came from. I hesitated. Personally, I was not too fond of that idea, but peer pressure won. With my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We approached, stacked up to the door, and opened it. Struggling against it was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. Entering, the metallic smells and must became stronger, mixed with a hint of something else, which I couldn't put my finger on. Our flashlights pointed in every direction as Brian leading the group through tight hallways, flanked by an occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. The air was stifling. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we pressed on, Brian lit his flashlight into a room, halting us. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered. I asked, "What is it?" He replied, "I thought I saw someone here, but it seems fine now." I suspected a prank, thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but later believed he was being completely honest. We moved deeper, continued walking deeper into the psych ward, until another friend swiftly told us to stop. We listened, hearing the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway ahead. Fear gripped us. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. But Brian continued walking towards the sound. We debated fleeing. We'd consider turning back for a second without Brian, fearing some ghost or someone was in the building, but loyalty held. We couldn't do that to him. The sensation intensified. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. Entering a room on the right, we were hit by the smell of rotting meat. Before us lay a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend retched, vomited all over the floor. Then we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian's light found a man with short hair standing with his head down in the corner, wearing a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assumed was blood and torn beige pants. No socks on, and his feet seemed damaged, twitching sporadically, and continued to mumble. We stared, transfixed, until he looked up at us with a haunting grin that chilled us, asking, "You guys here for the feast?" Panic erupted, kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. We tried to slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It actually took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, glimpsing the silhouette of the man watching us with his white teeth before it sealed. We sat behind the metal door, catching our breath, confirming, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. A light tapping on the door spurred us to flee. We decided that it was time to leave and booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. Later, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man, a former patient who used to go to the psych ward before it was closed down. He'd escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off the wildlife, suffering a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse. Rumors swirled. He did kill someone in the forest while searching for food once, but nothing has been confirmed. The warning lingered. Be careful, especially in dangerous areas like abandoned buildings. I avoided those ruins after, haunted by his grin, researching the hospital's dark past, tales of neglect and vanishings, but found no answers. The forest around it feels alive, whispering his words, daring me to return. Story number 7, The Men at the Table. You're small, sitting alone in a place that feels too big, too empty. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzes overhead, and the air smells of grease and stale coffee. You're waiting, trusting, but then you feel it, a weight, like eyes crawling over you, pinning you in place. They're watching, not just glancing, but staring. Their gaze is heavy and unyielding. You're too young to name the fear, but it's there, twisting in your chest. You look up, and their faces are wrong. Smiles too wide, eyes too dark, like they see something you don't. One of them speaks, his voice loud, cutting through the quiet. His words are playful, but they're not a game. The others laugh, a sound that grates, sharp and cruel. You want to run to hide, but you're frozen, a small thing in a world that suddenly feels dangerous. You're alone, but not for long. Someone's coming back, someone who'll take you away. But in those moments, you learn something you can't unlearn. Some people look at you and see prey, and that knowledge will follow you. A shadow you can't shake. Years later, you'll still feel their eyes, hear their laughter in quiet places. You'll lock your doors, check your windows, because you know now the world isn't always safe, and some threats hide behind scenes, waiting for you to be alone. So, I was about 7 years old when this happened. My name was Casey, and I was just a kid, small for my age, with pigtails and a love for fries dipped in ketchup. My dad and I had stopped at a fast food restaurant in a pretty shady area because he needed a quick break. There weren't that many people dining in there. The place nearly empty, its tables sticky, its lights flickering like they were tired. The restrooms were in the very back, like in most fast food places. Dad gave me a reassuring smile before heading off. My dad told me to stay at the table right outside the bathroom and that he'd be right back. I nodded, clutching my soda, trusting him completely. I wasn't too worried because although I didn't like being left alone, my dad always made sure to be super quick in public bathrooms so I wouldn't be by myself for long. I sat there, swinging my legs, counting the tiles on the floor to pass the time. But then I felt it, a prickle on the back of my neck, like the air had shifted. Almost immediately after he went in, I felt eyes on me and glanced up, my stomach tightening. I noticed there was a small group, maybe of 3 to 5 older men, all in their late 50s, sitting a few tables away. They were all looking at me, their faces blank, their eyes unblinking. They were all staring at me simultaneously without speaking. I shrank in my seat, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Why are they looking at me? What did I do? I remember feeling kind of scared because it was so odd. Even as a little kid who didn't really know what was going on, then one of them spoke, his voice loud enough to echo in the nearly empty room. One of them says fairly loudly, and I remember this so vividly. Wow, look at that pretty little girl over there all alone. He leaned forward, his smile sharp, his words dripping with something I couldn't name but felt wrong. We should do something about that. The others erupted into laughter, harsh and grating, like they were sharing a joke I wasn't meant to understand. They all burst out laughing. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. They're talking about me. They're going to do something bad. I felt so much dread at this point. I stared at my soda, willing Dad to come back, my hands shaking. Please, hurry, please. Fortunately, my dad came out moments later. He took one look at me, my face pale, my eyes wide, and his smile faded. I whispered something to him that I don't remember, but I think he could tell something was wrong by how scared I looked. I don't know what I said, maybe just, Dad, let's go. But he didn't ask questions. Without saying anything, he walked out with me and we rushed to the car. I clung to his hand, my heart still racing, the men's laughter ringing in my ears. We never spoke about it, not then, not ever. We never talked about it, but something changed. After that day, my dad would always take me into the public bathrooms with him. He'd hold my hand in crowded places, check behind us when we walked to the car. I didn't need to tell him what happened. He'd seen it in my eyes, felt it in the way I'd trembled. I know this might not be the creepiest story, but it was enough to leave a mark. It was scary enough that, combined with some other experiences, I don't think I can ever fully 100% trust a man to not be creepy or want to hurt me. That moment, those men, there were words, their laughter, it taught me something I was too young to learn. Everlasting trauma is certainly fun. I grew up watching my back, scanning rooms for exits, listening for footsteps too close. Those men are gone, but their eyes aren't. I see them sometimes, in strangers who linger too long, in smiles that don't reach the eyes. I don't eat at fast food places alone anymore. Don't sit with my back to the room. Some lessons you learn as a child stay with you, sharp and cold, like a warning you can't ignore. And sometimes, in the quiet, I hear their laughter again, and I wonder what they meant, what they would have done if Dad hadn't come back when he did. Story number 18, The Woman in the Snow. The night was too dark, the kind that swallows you whole. Mark's van rumbled down the icy Pennsylvania back road, the only sound the crunch of tires on snow. He was alone, or so he thought. A flicker of headlights caught his eye, a vehicle parked in the middle of nowhere. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He slowed, heart thudding, and saw it, a shape in the snow, writhing, fighting for life. This wasn't a breakdown. This was a crime. The scene burned into his mind like a photograph. A Dodge Durango sat idling, its beams cutting through the dark on the ground. A man pinned a woman, his hands around her throat, her body thrashing beneath him. Mark's breath caught, his hands trembling on the wheel. He had to act, but the road was too narrow, his van too bulky. He drove on, searching for a place to turn, every second an eternity. By the time he turned back, the Durango was gone. The snow lay disturbed, a silent witness to violence. Mark's headlights found her, a woman, crumpled, barely alive. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounded. Was she dead? She stirred, struggling to her feet, her thin frame shaking in the freezing night. Her eyes met his, hollow, haunted, pleading for something he couldn't name. He couldn't leave her there. Mark jumped out, his boots sinking into the snow. She was fragile, like a bird caught in a storm, blood streaking her face. He guided her to his van, cranking the heat to warm her trembling body. Her silence was louder than any scream, a wall he couldn't breach. He fumbled for his phone, praying for a signal. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a race against whatever hunted her. The cold seeped into the van, but her fear was colder. She sat hunched, clutching her torn jacket, her fingers raw and red. Mark wanted to ask, to understand, but her eyes warned him to stay quiet. He dialed 911, voice steady despite the dread gnawing at him. Whoever did this was still out there, maybe watching. The operator promised a trooper, but the wait felt endless, each minute heavy with unspoken truths. I service firefighting, breathing air compressors, and was on a service call in the northwest of Pennsylvania. Mark was used to routine jobs, but this night was different. As I drove down this twisty rural two-lane, I passed a Dodge Durango on the side of the road with its headlights on. The sight had seemed innocent at first, a breakdown, maybe. I slowed down and went behind the Durango to see a shape lying on the ground, but innocence shattered when he saw the truth. I thought it might be a driver trying to get the spare wheel out from under the vehicle, but then I realized it was a man on top of a woman, holding her down and apparently trying to strangle her. Mark's mind raced, his instincts screaming to intervene. I had to drive about a quarter of a mile further before I found a spot to turn around. His van wasn't built for speed or sharp turns. I turned around and headed back. The Durango passed me, heading the way I'd been going originally. The attacker had fled, but the damage was done. I got to where it had been parked, and the woman was lying there in the snow. Mark's heart sank. Fearing the worst, I thought she might be dead. But as I pulled up, she sat up, then shakily got to her feet. She was older, maybe 40, her frame gaunt, her clothes too thin for the winter night. She was probably in her 40s, very thin and in a skirt and an inadequate jacket. Her vulnerability cut through him like a knife. I asked if she was okay, and she just said, "I'm cold." Her voice was barely a whisper, broken by shivers. I had to get her into the passenger seat of my truck and cranked up the heat. She curled into herself, blood smearing her cheek, her hands trembling. She sat there shivering, her body hunched forward. She had blood on her face and her fingers were red. Mark offered napkins and water, but she barely moved, lost in her own terror. I pulled out my phone and surprisingly had enough signal to call 911. The signal was a miracle in this remote stretch. I explained what I had seen, and they dispatched a state trooper. Mark stayed calm for her sake, but his mind churned. What had he stumbled into? The only thing the woman said was, "They're going to arrest me." Her words hung heavy, a puzzle with missing pieces. I offered her some napkins and water, and she wiped her face off. She cleaned the blood, but not the fear. The trooper's arrival broke the silence. His cruiser's lights flashed, a stark contrast to the oppressive dark. She tensed, her body bracing for judgment. Mark watched as she stepped out, her movement slow, deliberate. She said, "Thank you for helping me." Her gratitude was fleeting, swallowed by whatever awaited her, and walked over to the trooper. The officer spoke briefly, then guided her to his car, her silhouette fading into the night. He came over and I explained what I had seen and described the Durango. Mark recounted every detail, the man, the struggle, the fleeing vehicle. He thanked me and said I could go. Mark drove away, the woman's face etched in his memory, her words echoing. What did she mean? They're going to arrest me? Days later, a voicemail from a restricted number. It was a restricted number, and the voicemail was from the trooper, thanking me again, saying that he may need me to offer some more testimony if I was willing. But no call came. I never heard back from the police. I never found out what had happened. Mark searched for news, but the story vanished like the Durango into the night. I think it was either a sex worker or a drug deal that went bad, but I never saw anything about it. His guesses felt hollow, inadequate for the horror he'd witnessed. Some nights, he saw her in his dreams, bloodied, shivering, staring through him. The road was just a road now, but its shadows held secrets. Years later, Mark avoided that stretch of highway. The woman's face haunted him, a ghost he couldn't shake. He wondered about her life, her attacker, the truth she carried. Had she escaped? Or was she trapped in a different kind of prison? The snow had melted, but the cold of that night lingered in his bones. Some stories don't end. They fester unanswered in the dark. Story number on the vanishing note. The forest didn't just surround the campsite, it watched, its shadows twisting under the moonlight as if alive with hidden eyes. At 11, Mia joined her classmates for her first camping trip, buzzing with excitement. The night was supposed to end with ghost stories, but the storyteller never arrived, leaving the group restless. So, as our final evening activity, we went on a night hike instead. The trail was alive with whispers, not from the wind, but from something deeper, older, woven into the trees. The walk was pretty normal and actually quite fun until we stumbled upon these cute little fairy homes built into a tree. The tiny wooden houses, carved with intricate runes, glowed faintly, their doors beckoning. We all looked at the tiny houses and noticed you could open one of the doors. Mia's friend, Sam, pried one open, revealing a folded note inside. So, we looked inside and found what was rather spooky. It was a note saying back in 5. The words weren't just odd, they felt wrong, like a warning meant for someone else. Now, this may not seem that scary, but just you wait. The air grew heavier, the forest's whispers sharpening into a low chant. Mia's flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Their teacher, Ms. Carter, urged them to move on, her voice tight with unease. We carried on and kept walking, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the note wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The group pressed deeper into the woods, the path narrowing, the trees closing in. Then, a glint of water caught their lights, a lake. Its surface too still, reflecting nothing. Later on, we stumbled upon a lake and we looked across it, shining our light so that we could see and saw something rather strange. On the opposite shore, shapes loomed, not natural, but man-made. Parked on the opposite side were a few vans and cars facing us. The vehicles' headlights were off, but their doors hung open. Silhouettes moving inside. We were instantly spooked, and to make things worse, we started to see people walk around. Was this a prank? Or had they stumbled into something no camper was meant to see? The silhouettes weren't just people. They moved with purpose, their steps synchronized, as if part of a dance only they understood. You could tell something wasn't right because even the teachers seemed to be scared and nervous. Miss Carter whispered for the group to stay quiet, her hands trembling as she gripped her flashlight. The doors of the van were open, and I believe something was inside, but I can't remember. Mia strained to see, catching glimpses of robed figures arranging objects in a circle by the lake. The air buzzed not with insects, but with a vibration that crawled up her spine. She clutched the note, still in her pocket, its words, back in 5, burning in her mind. The group retreated, their footsteps muffled, but the forest seemed to amplify their fear. Halfway back, Sam suggested checking the fairy houses again, his voice shaky but curious. Nevertheless, it scared us more and more, and soon after we left and headed back to the fairy gnome houses, Mia hesitated, but the group's curiosity pulled her along. On our way back, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check if the note was still there. The houses were unchanged, but the open door now revealed nothing. No note, no trace. It was not. And that sent shivers down our spine. The emptiness was worse than the note's presence. It meant someone had been here, watching them. We left straight away, and for the rest of the night, we wondered who took the note. Back at the campsite, the teachers huddled, whispering about old legends, a cult that once used the forest for rituals, marking trees with fairy homes as altars. Mia's dreams that night were fractured, filled with robed figures chanting by the lake, their faces hidden, but their eyes glowing. The next morning, she found a rune carved into her tent stake, matching the fairy houses. The group left early, the teachers refusing to discuss the vans. Years later, Mia researched the forest, uncovering stories of missing campers and strange lights by the lake. The note's meaning haunted her. Back in 5 wasn't a casual phrase, but a signal, a timer for something unfinished. Had they interrupted a ritual, or were they part of it, marked by the note they'd found? Story number 20, The Hidden Chamber. Some houses keep their secrets buried deep. The old farmhouse stood like a relic, its weathered beams groaning under the weight of forgotten years. Every room felt alive, as if the walls themselves remembered the lives that had passed through. My now ex-husband and I purchased what used to be an old farmhouse, drawn to its sprawling, mismatched charm. It was a unique old house that had been added on to many times over the years. We poured our hearts into it, sanding floors, painting walls, making it ours. But there was a hum in the air, a whisper that lingered in the quiet corners, hinting at something we hadn't yet uncovered. Ever wonder what lies behind the walls of an old home? The farmhouse was a labyrinth, each addition a puzzle piece from a different era. We started updating it room by room. New lights, fresh paint, modern fixtures. My 3 boys, full of energy and curiosity, filled the house with life. I had 3 boys from my previous marriage who were 9, 11, and 4 that lived with us, their laughter echoing through the halls. But the basement, with its low ceilings and musty air, felt different. We had been living there about a year before we began to work on the finished basement. It was a space we'd avoided, a dark maze of storage rooms and cobwebs, waiting for its turn to be tamed. Some discoveries start with a spark of excitement. Our first project was practical, a way to bring order to chaos. The first project in the basement we planned on doing was to convert one of the good-sized storage rooms into a walk-in closet for coats, skis, and holiday decorations. The room was cluttered, stuffed with relics from the previous owner. The previous owner had left several cheap metal shelving units behind in this room that we'd never moved. They stood like sentinels, holding dusty boxes and forgotten tools. I was eager to start, to rip out the old and build something new. But the basement had a way of making you feel watched, its shadows shifting just out of sight. What do you do when a movie becomes your reality? The night before, we'd curled up with popcorn and a scary movie, one my 11-year-old, Eric, had picked out. The boys now had rented videos and watched Stir the Echoes with Kevin Bacon. The film was eerie, about a man haunted by visions of a girl trapped behind a basement wall, her story hidden in plastic and secrets. The movie was about a dad character, Kevin Bacon, having dreams or visions about a young girl who had died and needed him to find her. It wasn't too intense, but had a few suspenseful parts that made us jump. Predictable, but we all enjoyed it, especially my 11-year-old who loved scary movies. Eric's eyes had sparkled, his imagination already racing. The line between fiction and truth can blur in an instant. Alone in the house, I descended into the basement, the air cool and heavy. I start on the storage room project. The room was dim, lit by a single bulb that flickered like a heartbeat. The walls in this room are covered in thin paneling, worn and stained. I began hauling out the metal shelves, their legs scraping the concrete. Then I saw it. The paneling on one side of the walls behind the shelving isn't snug against the wall like the rest. It bowed outward, a gap at the base wide enough to slip a finger through. My pulse quickened. I take a closer look and see a very small slide lock like a miniature deadbolt cut into the paneling, and a distinct cutout like door, a hidden door. What the hell? We have a secret room. The discovery was too wild to keep to myself. My hands shook as I ran upstairs, the phone all ready to my ear. I run upstairs and call the boys at their dad's house nearby. Eric answered, his voice bright with curiosity. Eric! The 11-year-old answers his phone, and I tell him what I found in the basement. He whooped, barely letting me finish before promising to race over. He's super excited to check it out and jumps on his bike and pedals home, arriving red-faced and grinning. This is exactly the kind of thing Eric loves. We descended together, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. We go back into the basement. The basement felt smaller now, the air thicker, as if it knew we were close to its secret. I slide the lock and pry the door open with a screwdriver. The panel creaked, revealing a wall of heavy plastic sheeting, its surface cloudy and taut. The first thing we see is a thick plastic sheeting, just like the one we'd seen in the movie we'd watched. Eric's eyes widened, a nervous laugh escaping him. We slam it shut and start laughing. The coincidence was uncanny, our movie night suddenly real. He says, "We've got to be brave, Mom." His courage fueled mine. So, I go find a razor knife and slice through the plastic. The blade parted the sheeting, and we peered inside. Inside is a small room with a sandy dirt floor that has several old tea sets and buckets of old glass tubes and an old desk with newspapers in it. No ghosts, no bodies, just a dusty time capsule. We sure had fun going through the desk and laughing about the secret room. The room became our treasure trove. Eric sifted through brittle newspapers, their headlines faded but legible. Stories from decades past, the TVs, relics of the 1950s, sat heavy and silent, their screens dark. The glass tubes, likely from old radios, clinked in their buckets. We named it the Stir Room, a nod to the movie that had set our hearts racing. My father-in-law later visited, chuckling at our excitement. My father-in-law said that it was an old-fashioned root cellar that was used to store root vegetables like potatoes back in the day. A practical explanation, but it didn't dull the thrill. What a strange coincidence that we had watched that movie just before. But the farmhouse wasn't done with us. The basement began to feel different after that day. Its shadows sharper, its silence heavier. Eric, ever the adventurer, would sneak down to explore, claiming he heard faint hums from the walls. I dismissed it as his imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was more than a cellar. Some nights, I'd lie awake, wondering what else the house was hiding. The newspapers hinted at the farm's past, families, tragedies, a fire that had nearly claimed the place. Was the room a storage space or something else entirely? I started researching the farmhouse's history, digging through county records. The land had been worked for centuries, each owner leaving their mark. One story stood out, a recluse who'd lived here in the 1940s, obsessed with electronics, hoarding radios and early TV. Its locals said he'd vanished, leaving his belongings behind. Was that his room, sealed away like a tomb? The boys, especially Eric, loved the mystery, turning it into a game. But I noticed things. Tools moved, lights flickering, a faint smell of ozone near the door. The farmhouse felt alive, watching, waiting for us to uncover its next secret. Still breathing? Good. But remember, some stories stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Don't forget to like, comment your favorite scare, and subscribe for more true American terror. Until next time, sleep tight if you can,